It began with a door. Not a strange door, not a heavy one, just a door that shouldn't have been there. Micah had been in and out of Dorman Hall's basement enough times to know every pipe, every buzz of old wiring, every dented trash can and maintenance cart that sat untouched against the concrete walls. The layout was simple. Straight hallway, 5 utility rooms, a storage cage at the end, and no surprises. The kind of place that forgets to be noticed. That was why he used it. He recorded parts of his student-run podcast there. A small project with a few hundred listeners, mostly other students who liked conspiracy talk. Not ghosts or aliens. He didn't believe in that kind of thing. He liked real-world inconsistencies, gaps in the official version, questions that didn't go away with time. It was late afternoon when he noticed it. He had just finished packing up the recorder and was halfway down the hallway when something tugged at the edge of his attention. A door stood where no door had ever been. Steel, faded gray, with a keypad to the right. There was no sign, no label, no emergency marker, but just above eye level a number had been stenciled in red, faint and uneven. 41. He stopped walking. He tried to make sense of it. The space where the door stood had always been flat wall. He remembered that clearly. He had leaned his backpack against it last week while adjusting cables. There had been nothing there. Now there was a door, solid, flush with the floor and locked. Micah stepped closer and pressed his fingers lightly against the metal. Cold. Thick. Real. There was no sound coming from the other side. No air movement, no machinery. Just a strange silence, like the kind found in places built to be forgotten. He took a photo of it, not because he thought it was important yet, but because something told him he'd want proof. Then he went upstairs. Later that night he messaged Talia. She was the only person on campus who knew how his mind worked. She studied psychology, read too much about behavioral patterns, and saw red flags where most people saw coincidence. He liked that about her. He asked her if she'd ever seen room 41 in Dorman Hall. She replied that there was no room 41. She said the hallway went from room 40 to room 42. No skip, no hidden space. Micah told her that he had stood in front of it less than 4 hours ago, that it was there now, that it had a keypad. Talia didn't send another message right away. When she finally did, she said no staff around. The door was still there, same keypad, same faded red number. Talia stared at it for a while and said it looked older than the rest of the hallway, like it had been installed. Then F. She ran her fingers along the edge and said she could feel the texture difference between the frame and the original wall. Micah pointed to the keypad. He said he had no idea if it worked. There was no light, no beep when he pressed it. Just plastic under his fingertips and dust around the edges, like no one had touched it in years, or like someone cleaned it very carefully, very often. Talia stepped back and said they needed to check building plans. That night she pulled blueprints from the university archives, scanned them into her laptop, and confirmed what they already suspected. There was no room 41. Not now. Not ever. The blueprints showed a continuous concrete wall where the door now stood. Micah listened quietly as she explained. She said that for a room to exist, it would have to appear somewhere in the fire safety records, utility access diagrams, or construction updates. This one didn't. He asked her what that meant. She answered that someone had created the space without documenting it, and that on a campus like theirs, where every storage closet was tagged and regulated, that kind of absence wasn't a mistake. It was intentional. 2 days later, Micah left a small audio recorder on the ground beside the door. He pretended to be on his phone, sitting cross-legged at the end of the hallway while the recorder captured sound. He listened to it that night. For the first 35 minutes there was nothing but ambient noise, the buzz of fluorescent lighting, the creak of a pipe, footsteps echoing from the stairwell above. Then, just past minute 36, something changed. A metallic click, a pause. Then a muffled sound, not sharp, not mechanical, more like a shift, the kind of sound made when someone moves behind a thick barrier. And then breathing, very faint, 2 seconds long, followed by silence. Micah played it 3 times before sending the file to Talia. He didn't offer theories. He just asked her to listen. The next morning, she said it was definitely breathing, not wind, not vibration. Someone had been inside. She said they needed help. That evening, they contacted Brandon, a senior in electrical engineering who had experience with access control systems and owed Micah a favor. Brandon looked at the photo of the keypad and said it was outdated but could still be wired into a hidden control box. He said he'd try to pull the wiring diagram from maintenance. He came back 48 hours later with news. There was no electrical record of that keypad, no schematics, no voltage draw from that side of the basement. As far as campus systems were concerned, the keypad wasn't connected to anything, which left one possibility. It was powered and controlled from inside. That was when the tone of the conversation changed. Micah asked what that meant. Brandon said it meant someone had access, someone who didn't want anyone else getting in. Talia asked how that was even possible. Brandon said, if someone had the right tools and no oversight, it was easier than people thought. Micah sat back, letting the silence grow heavier. Something was behind that door. Something recent, something protected, and someone knew how to get in. If you're still watching this, hit that like button, subscribe so you don't miss the rest of what we found, and comment below. From where are you watching this story? Let us know your city, because what's behind that door isn't just a room. The next time Micah saw movement near room 41, it was just after midnight. He had left the library late after editing audio, walked past the dorms, and decided, without really planning to pass through Dorman Hall's side entrance. The building was mostly dark. Only the emergency lights lit the lower hallway in pale green strips along the walls. At the bottom of the basement stairs, he paused. He told himself he was only checking if the door was still there. Part of him hoped it wasn't. That maybe he'd imagined it, or that someone would seal it up, close the loop, and make it vanish like a glitch in a system. But the door was still there, so was the keypad. Then, just as he turned to leave, he saw a figure walking fast across the hallway, tall, hooded, carrying something. Micah froze. The person moved directly toward the door, paused at the keypad, and tapped a sequence without hesitation. No beep, just a solid click. The door opened a few inches. The figure slipped inside. The door closed silently behind them. Micah stood still in the dark. He hadn't been seen. He waited a full minute, heart racing, then slowly backed up the stairs and left the building. He didn't sleep that night. He didn't tell Talia right away either. He needed to be sure. The next day, between classes, he went to the library and pulled Dorman Hall's electrical plans again. The space behind the wall, where the door now opened, was supposed to be filled with insulation and pipes. There wasn't even enough square footage for a room, but somehow a full-grown adult had stepped inside and vanished into it. When he finally told Talia, she didn't look surprised. She said that someone must have built the space deliberately, not just hidden it, designed it to exist in the blind spot between documented spaces. She said it was probably built during the last renovation, maybe even before that. Micah asked her what kind of person would need a room like that. She said it would have to be someone with access, someone trusted, or someone who knew how to fake trust. That night, they returned to the hallway together. Talia brought a flashlight. Micah brought a second recorder. They didn't get close to the door, just sat against the wall halfway down the hall waiting for movement. Nothing happened for the first hour. They heard a door open upstairs. Someone dropped something on a tile floor 2 levels above. Then silence again. Talia said quietly that they couldn't afford to get caught watching the door. If whoever was using it found out they were being observed, they might shut it down or worse, relocate. Micah asked if she wanted to stop. She said no. She said they were too far in now to walk away. Later that week, they brought Brandon back into the conversation. He was skeptical, but not dismissive. He said that if someone had created a fully concealed space within a university building, it was either part of a sanctioned project, which meant it would be classified under restricted maintenance logs, or it was completely unsanctioned. Talia asked what kind of unsanctioned project would require a soundproof room in a student residence hall. Brandon didn't answer right away. Then he said it could be anything: private storage, data analysis, illegal surveillance, or something simpler and more dangerous. A place for someone to hide. Micah said they needed to figure out who the person was, the one he had seen entering the room. They started narrowing down possibilities. First, they pulled class schedules and housing assignments. Only students with Dorman access would be able to move freely after midnight. Micah checked campus security patterns. The guards rarely did rounds after 11 unless called. That gave whoever was entering the door a long window of time. Talia focused on faculty. She said the person moved with confidence, not like they were sneaking, but like they belonged there. That meant staff, or someone with building knowledge. They created a list. 6 names, 2 maintenance workers, 3 grad students with key access, and 1 associate professor from the engineering department who'd helped install the building's first surveillance system a decade ago. They started watching schedules, movement, sign-ins. But the more they dug, the stranger it got. No one on their list had any overlap in the time Micah saw the door open, and no one admitted to knowing anything about room 41. One of the grad students, a quiet guy named Reed, laughed when Talia brought it up during a casual conversation about building layout. He said he'd never heard of a room 41 in Dorman and that there wasn't even physical space for it. She told him that was what she thought too, but then he changed the subject. 2 days later, Micah passed by the door again. This time it was slightly ajar, only by an inch. He stood still, unsure whether to call someone, record it, or just back away. He leaned closer, heart pounding, and listened. No sound, no air movement, just the thick, motionless silence of something sealed off from the rest of the world. Then the door clicked again, not opening further, not closing, just resetting, locking. Micah backed up slowly, then turned and left without looking back. That night he told Talia everything. She said it was time to start asking real questions, not to other students, not to faculty, but to the one person who might actually know what was going on, the building manager. They decided to meet him together, make it sound casual. Just a curious project for a student podcast. They'd ask about building changes, renovations, strange spaces. They didn't plan to bring up the door directly. Not yet. What none of them knew was that before the week ended, the door would no longer be their biggest concern. If you're still following this story, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Like the video if you're finding this as strange as we are, and comment below, from where are you watching? Which city are you in? Because someone built a room no one was supposed to find and now we're standing right outside it. Micah and Talia agreed not to act immediately. If they went to the building manager too quickly or too directly, they risked exposing the fact that they had been watching the basement. So they waited for the right moment, choosing a slow, careful approach. The opportunity came during an afternoon maintenance inspection that Talia learned about through a shared calendar linked to her student housing account. The building manager, Thomas Granger, was doing routine checks on heating systems before the cold hit in full. Talia suggested they happen to cross paths near the boiler room. They found him exactly where she predicted, clipboard in hand, checking valves behind a grated panel in the lower hallway. He looked like a man who didn't enjoy being interrupted, but not unfriendly. Mid-50s, clean shirt tucked into worn jeans, radio clipped to his belt. Micah said they were working on a student podcast about the hidden parts of campus, stories people missed. He asked if Granger had ever come across unusual construction, changes to Dorman's layout, or anything undocumented from past renovations. Granger paused, squinting slightly. He said the building had seen dozens of fixes over the years, most of them boring. Leaks, old wiring, asbestos removal. He said nothing structural had changed on paper since the early 2000s. Talia asked if there were ever cases where something got built but wasn't officially recorded. Granger gave a dry laugh and said that kind of thing happened in older city buildings, especially off campus, but not here. He said the university was strict about inspections. He added that he'd walked every square foot of Dorman more times than he could count. Micah asked whether he'd ever noticed a room between 40 and 42. That was when Granger's tone shifted. He asked what exactly they meant by noticed. Micah said they'd seen a door that didn't match the building map. Granger looked at them both for a long second, then said he had to get back to his inspection and walked away without another word. Talia said that reaction wasn't neutral. It was avoidance. They decided not to press him further, not yet, but the fact that he didn't deny it, didn't even pretend confusion, was proof enough that he knew something. That night, they found an old set of student forums archived on a private server used by alumni from the early 2000s. Most of the posts were about course loads, professors, events that no longer existed. But buried deep in a thread about campus myths, they found something that made them stop. A post dated over 15 years ago mentioned a locked door in the basement of Dorman Hall. The user said no one could open it, and that sometimes they heard clicking behind the wall late at night. There were only 2 replies, both mocking, and the thread ended. But the timestamp matched a time before either of them had been students, before smartphones, before digital class schedules. The door had existed long enough to be remembered and forgotten again. Micah said this changed everything. The room wasn't new. It had been hidden in plain sight for over a decade. The next day, Brandon helped them run a heat signature scan using a handheld infrared thermometer designed for HVAC maintenance. They borrowed it under the pretense of checking for airflow issues. The reading from the door was consistent, with an occupied space, slightly warmer than the hallway, steady across the surface. No extreme heat, no machinery-level warmth, just the kind of subtle increase that comes from a human body. Brandon said it didn't make sense unless the room had ventilation, which it shouldn't. The walls around it weren't supposed to be hollow. Talia asked if it was possible that someone had built internal systems disconnected from the building's infrastructure. Brandon said yes, but it would require planning, access, and money. More than a student would normally have. That raised a new possibility. What if the person using the room wasn't a student? They began checking university staff records, focusing on employees who had worked in Dorman for over 10 years. Most of them had come and gone. But one name appeared consistently across maintenance logs: Gerald M. Faulkner, retired 5 years ago, no known family, worked alone most of his shift. Oversaw minor renovations during the early 2000s. Micah asked if there were any digital footprints on him, social media, news, anything. Talia searched and found nothing. It was as if Faulkner had disappeared after retirement. They requested archived maintenance schedules under the guise of academic research. Inside a scanned PDF from the year 2006, they found something small but telling: a line item titled Basement Sector Re-Insulation, Section 4A, Dorman. There was no Section 4A in Dorman, not officially. But the date matched the post from the forum, and the initials next to the line item were GMF. Micah said it was a breadcrumb. Brandon said it was a blueprint for something hidden. They returned to the basement that night, hoping to catch another glimpse of whoever used the door. But this time the hallway was not empty. As they reached the bottom of the stairs, they saw a faint light coming from under the door. Not bright, not flickering, just a steady glow, like from a small lamp or a screen. Talia grabbed Micah's arm and told him not to move. They waited, watched, counted seconds. The light never changed. Micah whispered that it might be empty, that maybe someone left something running inside. Talia said she didn't believe in maybes anymore. They stayed another 20 minutes, but no one came or went. Finally, they left, silent. Later that night, they listened to a new audio file recorded from just outside the door. At minute 42, the light turned off. There was a single footstep, then silence. Micah said the door wasn't just a secret, it was being used. If you're following this story, there's more coming. Subscribe so you don't miss what we found next. Like the video if you're as deep into this as we are. And tell us in the comments, from which city are you watching this? Because no one builds a hidden room just to leave it empty. The more they looked, the more the silence around room 41 felt designed. Not accidental, not lazy, constructed, like the room itself, with precision. Talia began focusing her attention on a single question: why hide a room in a student dormitory? She said there were only a few explanations that made sense. The first was bureaucratic, an error no one bothered to fix. But they had already ruled that out. Too many pieces lined up, too much active concealment. The second explanation was personal. Someone had used their access, through maintenance or security, to create a space inside the system that didn't officially exist, a place outside accountability. Micah said that if someone had used the space once, they might be using it still. Talia said that explained the light, the breathing, the movement, but not the silence from the university itself. She began cross-referencing university disciplinary records with dates tied to the known history of Dorman Hall, renovations, unexplained maintenance, and gaps in campus surveillance logs. Most of it led nowhere. But one case stood out. In 2009, a student reported hearing someone moving through the walls of the basement. The complaint was dismissed. The report said the student had been under stress, sleep-deprived, and possibly hallucinating. The student's name was redacted, but the incident was logged within 20 feet of room 41. Micah asked why no follow-up had been done. Talia said the administration probably wanted the story to disappear. No action meant no documentation, no trail. They kept digging. Micah pulled up archived campus security footage from the week he'd first seen the door. Most of the footage was stored on external servers for liability reasons and hadn't been reviewed unless requested. There, at 12:43 in the morning on a Thursday, was the figure he'd seen enter the door. The camera angle didn't show the keypad or the door itself, but it clearly captured the person walking down the hall, stopping and disappearing at the exact spot where room 41 was located. Micah froze the frame. The hoodie was dark grey, the jeans loose. The figure's build was average, not clearly male or female. The face was obscured. Talia said they were close, not to finding out what the room was, but to knowing who was using it. They turned back to the list of people with long-term building access. Faculty, security, alumni with legacy clearance. It was still possible the figure was none of them, but their behavior, confident, practiced, regular, suggested someone with experience inside Dorman Hall. Brandon suggested a different angle. He said if the room had power, there had to be a source. Even if it was off-grid, it would still need to pull electricity from somewhere. He offered to check circuit activity for that sector of the building, specifically during late-night hours when the door had been active. He came back the next day with a chart. At roughly 12:45 on 3 separate nights, there was a small spike in power use on one of the auxiliary panels near the basement. Not high enough to trip anything, but consistent, controlled. The kind of draw used by lighting, small electronics, maybe a fan. Brandon said the pattern meant someone was inside, likely working, maybe even living. Micah said that would explain the timing, the secrecy, the careful entry and exit. Talia didn't respond at first. Then she said something they hadn't considered yet. She asked what happened if the room was not just a secret, but a shelter, a space someone created to stay hidden, not just from the university, but from something else. Micah asked what kind of person would need that. Talia said she didn't know, but she wanted to find out. That weekend, they tried something different. Micah left a voice recorder just inside the hallway near the door, as usual. But this time he left a note with it. Folded paper, no name, just one line. "We know this room exists." He didn't expect an answer. When he retrieved the recorder the next morning, the note was gone. The recording was unchanged for the first 40 minutes. Then footsteps, slow, then silence again. But at the 53rd minute there was something else, a quiet rustling, like paper being unfolded. A pause, then a new sound, a whisper, soft, deliberate. One sentence, spoken close to the recorder. "She doesn't know I'm still here." Micah played it again. Talia listened with him. They sat in her dorm room in silence for nearly 10 minutes afterward. The voice was male, calm, controlled, almost tired. Micah said it sounded like someone who hadn't spoken out loud in a long time. Talia said the sentence wasn't directed at them. Not really. It sounded like a confession. They now knew someone was inside, that he was aware of being watched, and that he believed someone else, a woman, didn't know he still existed. That changed everything. They debated whether to respond, whether to leave another note, whether to report what they had found. But they both came to the same conclusion. They had entered something much deeper than they'd planned. And if this person had spent years staying hidden, there had to be a reason, a strong one. The final decision came when Brandon brought back another discovery. He'd checked the personnel archives again. Deep logs from the university's HR system, not normally accessible. But he still had a login from his internship 2 years ago. There, buried in a record dated October 2004, was a note about a former building technician, Gerald Faulkner, marked as deceased. Micah read the entry twice. The date matched the original renovation logs, the ones with Faulkner's initials. But if Faulkner had died in 2004, who was inside the room? Brandon said the death report looked incomplete. There was no certificate attached, no external documentation, just an internal memo saying status, terminated, deceased. Talia stared at the screen, then said something that made them all fall silent. She said the voice in the recording didn't sound like a stranger. She said she had heard it before. If you've made it this far, subscribe so you don't miss what we uncover next. Like the video if you're following the clues with us. And tell us in the comments, from where are you watching? Which city? Because whoever's behind that door was never supposed to be found. For the next few days, everything felt quieter. The hallway, the recorder, even the air in Dorman Hall, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Talia kept replaying the voice in her head. She said it wasn't just the words, it was the tone. Measured, worn, stripped of urgency. The way someone sounds when they've accepted something. Not sadness, not fear, just survival. Micah asked when she thought she'd heard it before. She said it didn't feel like a memory. It felt like recognition. Talia asked what happened if someone wasn't really dead, just erased. Micah said they needed to hear from the man himself. We want to understand. We won't tell anyone. A small piece of metal, rusted, old, shaped like a key but cut in a strange pattern. Not a house key, not a padlock. Something custom. Micah asked why someone would give it to them. That afternoon they went back together. No one else was around. Brandon stared at it. He said the writing looked old, maybe 15 or 20 years. He didn't touch anything. Talia said they shouldn't risk it yet. They still didn't understand who they were dealing with or what they were protecting. A rhythmic tapping, slow but deliberate, like someone using an old keyboard. The kind that makes more noise than modern ones. Mechanical, with weight behind each stroke. They debated whether to try speaking directly. To knock, to ask a question. But there was something about the silence that made them hesitate, as if breaking it would undo whatever fragile balance existed inside that space. Talia searched archived employee handbooks from the early 2000s. Buried in an appendix, she found a note about discretionary utility access during emergency infrastructure repairs. It referenced temporary, off-grid service panels authorized by facilities managers under specific renovation permits. Micah said it confirmed what they already suspected. The room wasn't an accident, it was planned. Given power, given purpose. At first, nothing showed up. But when he walked past room 41, the device lit up briefly. A faint signal. Encrypted. No network name. Just a short, repeating pulse, like a ping from a closed system waiting for a response. Talia asked how. Brandon said it might be a laptop, or a custom system wired into a power loop. He said whoever was inside might be communicating with someone off campus. It was active, and whoever was inside wasn't just watching, he was talking. Talia said it could have been anyone, a supervisor, a partner, someone from his past, but she admitted something else. Micah said maybe she was the she, because the story we're telling didn't end 15 years ago. They didn't know what they were building yet. It wasn't a theory, it wasn't a conclusion, just pieces, scattered, fragile, and slowly beginning to form a shape. Micah started leaving the recorder every night now, always in the same place, never hidden, never disguised. Whoever was inside room 41 knew it was there, and he hadn't moved it once. The recorder kept capturing the same subtle patterns, occasional breathing, mechanical sounds, keyboard tapping, once even the faint clink of glass. But on the fourth night, the pattern changed. At exactly 2:48 in the morning, the microphone picked up something it hadn't heard before. Music. Soft, faint, classical. A piano, slow and uneven, as if someone was playing with one hand or struggling to remember the notes. Micah listened to it 3 times, alone in his room. He said it didn't sound like a recording. It sounded like it was being played in real time. There were pauses, missteps, small mistakes. When he showed it to Talia, she closed her eyes. She said it felt familiar, not the piece itself, but the way it was played. She said it reminded her of grief, the kind of music someone plays for no one but themselves. Brandon ran a match search on the melody. It came back as an incomplete version of a piano etude by a minor American composer, someone few people knew. The piece wasn't in any mainstream playlists, which meant the man behind the door either had the sheet music or had memorized it long ago. That was the moment they stopped thinking of him as anonymous. He had memory, emotion, ritual. Talia said people don't play music like that unless they're trying to hold on to something. Micah asked what that might be. She said maybe a version of himself, one that existed before the silence. The next day, Brandon checked again for outgoing signals. The encrypted transmission was still active. Same faint pulse, same short burst of data every 30 minutes. Brandon still couldn't intercept it, but he noticed a change. The transmission had become more frequent. Someone inside was sending more. Micah said maybe he knew they were listening, and he was answering in his own way. That night, they decided to leave something more direct. Talia wrote a second note. This time the message was simple. "Are you Gerald?" They left it by the recorder at 11:30 at night. When Micah retrieved it the next morning, the note was still there, but someone had written underneath it. One word, no. The handwriting was slow, deliberate, and slightly shaky. A different pen, a different pressure, like it hadn't been used in years. Talia stared at it for a long time and said that wasn't a lie. It was a clarification. If he wasn't Gerald, then who was he? Micah asked what happened if Gerald had created the room, but someone else had inherited it. They reviewed everything again. The timeline, the renovations, the fake death report, the signal, the voice. Then Talia remembered something. She said the voice had said, "She doesn't know I'm still here." Not they, not you, she, a single person. They looked up Susan Faulkner again. Still no follow-up, no obituary, no second job, no trail. But Brandon noticed something odd. A purchase order buried in the financial archives of the university's housing department, dated March of 2004. It had been marked as equipment replacement, but the items listed were unusual: typewriter ribbon, analog microphone components, and cassette storage cases. The request had been signed off by S. Faulkner. Brandon said no one was using cassette storage by 2004. Talia said maybe she wasn't ordering equipment. Maybe she was replacing it for someone else, for someone who couldn't leave the building. Micah said it sounded like a cover-up. They all agreed on one thing: Susan Faulkner didn't leave her job. She was removed from it. They tried finding her. Public records, court databases, nothing, not even a trace of an address. Talia said it was like she had been erased, not in the way someone hides themselves, but in the way someone is erased when someone else wants them forgotten. That night they left another note. "Do you know Susan?" The next morning the note was gone. No answer, no writing, just silence. But later that day, when Micah checked the audio file, something new had appeared. A recording, not just ambient sound, but a clear, deliberate voice. The same voice as before, slower now, almost a whisper. "I remember the way she used to hum when the elevator was stuck." Micah sat frozen at his desk as he played the line again. It wasn't just a memory. It was intimate, specific, real. Talia said that wasn't the kind of thing someone invents. It was a moment, a fragment, something that doesn't fade unless it's taken away. Micah asked if it was a message. Talia said it was grief, disguised as nostalgia. They didn't respond, not immediately. Instead, they let the silence return. Let it breathe. 3 days passed. Then the transmission stopped. Brandon said there was no more signal from the room. No more pulses, no data, just dead air. Talia said maybe he was done. Maybe he had said what he needed to say. Micah said maybe he had left, but the recorder still picked up sound. Small, faint sounds. The piano again. The clinking of glass. The turning of pages. He was still there, he just wasn't talking anymore. If you're still watching this story, subscribe so you don't miss what we discover next. Like this video if you followed every note, every word, every signal, and comment below "From which city are you watching this?" Because silence isn't the absence of sound. It's the presence of everything no one ever said. They did not hear from him again for 5 nights. No notes, no voice, no movement. Just the same piano, repeating pieces of the same melody, as if his fingers could not move forward but could not stop either. Micah said it felt like he was slipping. Talia disagreed. She said it sounded like he was remembering. She said the repetition was not decay. It was preservation, a defense against forgetting. That was when she proposed something different. She wanted to leave him something, not a question, not a request, just a sound, a shared moment. She found an old portable tape recorder in the media lab, a model similar to the one he might have used years ago. She recorded a short message. Her voice was calm, neutral, offering no demands. She said her name. She knew about the room. They were not here to expose him or interfere, only to understand. Then she played a song, not music, but an ambient sound of a subway train moving through a tunnel, low and constant. She said maybe he missed that sound. They left the recorder overnight next to the usual device. It was still there the next morning, untouched. But when they played it back later, someone had recorded over the second half. It started with silence. Then the sound of someone breathing into the mic, controlled, like testing an old microphone before speaking. Then the voice came through, slower than before. She always hated the train, said it felt like going nowhere on purpose. Talia closed her eyes as it played. She did not speak for a long time. Micah said the voice sounded different, not just tired, but resigned. Talia said he was telling them about her bit by bit. The next day, Brandon finally accessed a forgotten internal server used during early building renovations with outdated project notes from before the university modernized its systems. He found a list of unrecorded maintenance projects. Most were small, minor electrical reroutes, fire code compliance. But one entry stood out, a temporary construction permit signed by Gerald Faulkner and Susan Faulkner, dated October of 2003. The project description read only, "Isolation Unit, internal access only." Brandon said that was the term used for closed research spaces, rooms designed to operate independently from the building. Micah said it explained everything: the hidden power source, silent locks, lack of paper trail. Talia asked what research needed that level of secrecy. Brandon said it may not be academic. It could be personal, psychological, a way to disappear without leaving campus. They did not know if the room was always meant as a hiding place, but someone had stayed inside for years, maybe not always alone. That night, they left another message. "Do you want us to stop?" It was their way of giving him a choice. When they retrieved the recorder the next morning, his voice was there again. No, that was all he said. No music, no breath. Just that word. Talia said it was permission. Micah said it was the closest thing to trust they would get. So they went further. They traced Susan Faulkner's connections, past colleagues, apartment leases, anything. They found an address, a condo 30 minutes from campus, listed under her name until 2005. After that, the trail went cold. No sale, no forwarding address, no property transfer. Talia said people do not just vanish, not legally unless someone helps them disappear. They drove to the address that weekend. The building still stood, an aging 3-story structure with a cracked walkway and rusting mailbox slots. Most units occupied, one boarded up. They asked the property manager about Susan Faulkner. He said her name sounded familiar. She used to keep to herself. She moved out one night and never returned. He remembered it was spring of 2005. Talia said that matched the signal, the last university maintenance request from that week. Something had happened then, something final. Back at campus, Brandon found a list of hardware requisitions from the following year. It included batteries, copper wire, insulation, food-grade sealant, and analog monitors, all listed under Archives, Dorman Basement, with no associated department. Micah said it sounded like preparation, not for research but for survival. Talia said maybe she left him there, or tried to protect him and failed. Either way, he had been alone since then. They did not leave a message that night, just the recorder. The next morning his voice returned, slower, rougher. She said it would not last, the building would forget him. He paused. But I did not forget her. Talia said this was no longer a mystery. It was a memory loop, a room made from absence, not to trap, but to preserve a moment no one would hold. Micah asked what it meant that he was still speaking and answering. Talia said maybe he did not know how to stop. Maybe he did not want to. Brandon said it was more than memory, a ritual, a closed system, a controlled collapse. Talia disagreed. She said it was love. Micah did not argue. If you are still here, subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. Like the video if you followed this far. Tell us in the comments, from which city are you watching? Because this story does not end with a door. It ends with someone who stayed behind, waiting to be remembered. It was Brandon who said it first, that maybe they had reached the edge of what they were meant to find, not because there were no more clues, but because the man inside room 41 had stopped speaking again. The last message had been almost a week ago. No breathing, no piano, no movement. The recorder picked up static and nothing else. Micah said maybe he was done. Talia said maybe he was watching. They didn't leave another message, not yet. They waited. Meanwhile, Talia kept searching. She found an old newsletter from 2002, printed by the university's maintenance department. It featured staff profiles, retirements, brief interviews. One of the articles was about Gerald Faulkner, a man who had worked for the university since the early 80s. Quiet, reclusive, no family mentioned. What stood out wasn't what the article said. It was what the article didn't say. In the accompanying photo, Gerald stood beside someone else. A woman, smiling. The caption didn't list her name, but Talia recognized her from the housing department's archives. Susan Faulkner. She wasn't his sister. She wasn't his colleague. She was his wife. Micah said that changed the way they had to see the room, not as a project, not as a cover-up, as something built between two people. Talia said it explained everything. The secrecy, the planning, the quiet grief in his voice. Grief. They didn't know what had separated them, whether she had left him or been taken away, whether she had tried to protect him or abandoned him. But they knew now that room 41 had never been about hiding from the world. It had been about holding on to her. That night they left one final message. We know about Susan, we're sorry. They didn't expect an answer. But the next morning the recorder held something else entirely. It wasn't a voice. It was the sound of the door unlocking, not opening, just clicking, as if an invitation had been given. Micah listened to it 3 times, then told Talia. They didn't know what it meant, whether it was safe, whether it was real. Talia said they weren't going to open it. Not yet. But they returned that night anyway, just the 2 of them. No gear, no notes, just presence. They stood outside room 41 for the first time without fear. The door looked the same, the keypad untouched. But now if they leaned close they could hear it. Not music, not breathing, a low hum, steady, electrical, like a server or a life support machine. Micah said maybe the room was still active. Maybe it was always meant to be active. Talia said maybe the room was the only thing keeping him whole. They didn't knock, they didn't try the handle, they simply stood there. After a while, Micah placed a hand gently on the metal. It felt warm, not hot, not mechanical, just lived in. He whispered that they weren't there to break the silence, just to stand inside it. Later that night, the recorder picked up a sound that wasn't supposed to be there. Footsteps from inside the room, not frantic, not sneaking, just walking. Then something even stranger. The door opened only for a second. No one stepped out, nothing moved. Just air shifting, carrying with it a faint scent. Dust, paper, and something else, something like lavender. Talia said she remembered that scent from the administration building. She said Susan used to wear it. Faint, always subtle, like something chosen to be remembered without trying. Micah said it was confirmation. The man inside wasn't hiding from them anymore. He was remembering her. With them. They didn't go back the next night. They didn't need to. Instead, they sat in the library, the recorder between them, playing the same 30-second clip over and over. The sound of steps, the door opening. That quiet scent they could still feel, even without being there. They said nothing. There was nothing to say. That was when Brandon joined them with something final. He'd found a data packet, intercepted from the old transmission line using a boosted receiver. It wasn't a signal, it was a file, encrypted, but not heavily, just enough to keep it quiet. Inside was a document, a journal, dated entries, typed slowly, rough formatting, and one title. Her voice remembered. It wasn't a diary, it wasn't a manifesto, it was a record of memories, a transcription of moments, conversations, glances, shared silence. Most of them short, some of them beautiful. The final entry read, "She told me once that memory isn't about accuracy. It's about holding on to something long enough that it still feels like it matters." Micah didn't speak. Talia closed the laptop and said that was all the confirmation they'd ever need, that the man inside room 41 had done something few people dared to do. He remembered. Not in anger, not in denial, but with care. Micah asked what they should do with the file. Brandon said they should delete it. Talia said they should save it, but never publish it. She said the story wasn't theirs, it had only passed through them. If you followed us this far, you know this isn't about a locked door anymore. It's about what lives quietly behind one. Subscribe if you want to hear how this ends. Like this video to keep this memory alive. And comment below, where are you watching from? Because some stories aren't found. They're shared when someone is finally ready to be seen. They didn't return to the hallway for 3 days. Not out of fear, but out of respect. The door had been opened. The silence had been broken. The story had been shared. Now they waited. Talia said it felt like the end of something, but not the end of him. Micah said it felt like they were being told goodbye without words. Brandon said nothing. He had already deleted the intercepted file, just like they agreed. The journal would stay with them, unshared, unread beyond its final entry. It was over, or at least it should have been. But on the 4th night, the recorder captured something unexpected. There was movement again, but not inside the room, outside. At 3:21 in the morning, the audio picked up 2 sets of footsteps, fast, unsteady, one following the other. There was a whisper, unintelligible, then the faint sound of metal hitting concrete. Micah listened to it at least 10 times. The second pair of steps didn't match the man inside the room. Too light, too quick. Talia said someone else had been there. Not them, not the man. A third presence. They went back the next night, more cautious than before. The hallway looked the same, but this time, the air felt different. The scent was gone. The warmth from the door had faded. And on the ground, just beside the frame, something small and white. A folded piece of paper. Micah picked it up, unfolded it carefully. There were only 5 words, printed in block letters. "You shouldn't have come back." Brandon said it wasn't his handwriting. It was tighter, more precise. No shake in the letters. Talia said it was a warning. Micah asked from whom. Brandon said maybe from someone who'd known about the room all along. That was when they remembered Granger, the building manager who had avoided their questions weeks ago. He had known something. He hadn't denied the room. He had walked away before they could ask more. Talia said maybe Granger hadn't built it. Maybe he had been told to protect it. Micah checked the maintenance logs again. Granger's ID showed entry into Dorman Hall almost nightly, but for the past week there were no logs at all. He wasn't showing up on campus systems. Brandon called a friend in student security. The guy checked manually. Granger had retired 3 days ago, no replacement listed, no notice. Micah said that was no coincidence. They agreed to leave one final recorder, not to ask anything, not to listen for him, just to see if anything else would happen. They left it at 11:25 at night. It was gone by morning. Not moved, not turned off, gone. Micah said they had been watched all this time, that whoever had built the room hadn't left it unguarded. Talia said that made sense. A space like that couldn't survive for 20 years without someone making sure it stayed hidden. But what they didn't understand was why it had been allowed to open, why the door had been unlocked, why the voice had answered. Unless it had been a choice. Micah said maybe he had wanted to be found. Brandon said maybe he had wanted to be remembered. That evening, the hallway was quiet again. The door was locked. The keypad was gone. In its place, a clean patch of wall. Seamless. Smooth. Like the door had never been there at all. Micah touched it. Just concrete, no warmth, no hum, no trace of what had been. He didn't speak, neither did Talia. They walked away together, leaving the hallway empty. That weekend they sat in the library again, the same corner table, the same silence between them. Talia said something that neither of them had dared say until now. She said she didn't think the man behind the door had died. She said she thought he had left. Micah asked how. Talia said maybe the same way he had stayed, with help. She said people don't just survive in secret. They survive because someone else wants them to. She said maybe Susan had never truly left him. Maybe someone had been keeping him safe even now. Brandon returned later that afternoon with a file from university archives, just days from being purged. He had requested it under his student ID before his system access expired. It was a memo, dated 6 weeks ago. A brief summary of discontinued building spaces flagged for repurposing. One line stood out. Dorman Hall, Sector 4A clearance revoked. Subject relocated. Talia whispered the words again. Subject relocated. Micah read the line slowly. There was no name, no explanation, no next location, just a record that someone had been moved. Someone the system had known about all along. Brandon said maybe the door hadn't been forgotten, maybe it had been protected until it no longer needed to be. Talia said maybe the man behind the door had finally chosen to step out. Micah didn't answer. He just sat there quietly for a long time. Then he said it wasn't about finding a person anymore. It was about what it meant to be remembered, even after being erased. That night, they didn't leave a recorder. They didn't check the hallway. They didn't need to. Because the door wasn't the point. The silence behind it was. If you've come this far, you already understand that this was never just about room 41. It was about what we leave behind when we disappear, and who stays behind to listen for us. Subscribe to hear how this ends. Like this video if you've been here since the first time we mentioned that door. And comment below, what city are you in right now? Because someone just like you may be watching from a room no one else remembers. The story didn't end in the hallway. It ended in a file folder, one that Talia found by accident, 2 weeks after the door had vanished. She had requested access to archived faculty correspondence for an unrelated class project. Among the scanned documents, she found a letter. Not official, not typed. Just a scanned image of a handwritten page, dated 2005. It had been addressed to a university administrator. The signature at the bottom was S. Faulkner. Susan. The content of the letter was vague, carefully worded. She spoke of a long-term oversight situation and requested the continuation of temporary support protocols for an unnamed individual with high containment preference. She used language designed to obscure, not reveal, but the meaning was clear to Talia. Susan had been the one who fought to keep him there, not as punishment, not as confinement, as shelter. Micah read the letter next. He said it didn't sound like guilt. It sounded like love, filtered through policy and fear. She had fought for him. Then, when she couldn't anymore, she had hidden him. They would never know the full story, not why he had needed to be hidden, not what had happened between them, not how the university had been convinced to allow it for so long. But they knew the room had not been an accident, and neither had its opening. Talia said maybe he had waited for years, quietly, for someone to come looking. Maybe he had left the keypad intact, not for protection, but as an invitation, to be remembered by someone other than her. Brandon said maybe they had arrived at the exact moment he needed them to. Micah agreed. He said some stories don't need to be told to everyone, just to someone. They never spoke to him again. The recording stopped. The room was sealed. The door erased. But a month later, an envelope arrived in Talia's campus mailbox. No return address, no message. Inside was a single Polaroid. It showed the hallway, room 41, still intact, just as they had seen it the first time. But this time, the door was open. Inside, the faint shape of a room, a chair, a small desk, a lamp. A coat hung neatly on a hook, and on the wall, faint but visible, a framed photograph. 2 people, standing beside a boiler panel, smiling. Talia knew who they were. Micah said he didn't understand why they had sent it to her. She said it wasn't for them to understand. It was simply a gift, a final proof that they had seen what they saw, that it had been real, that someone had lived behind the silence and had chosen finally to be seen. They kept the photo in a folder, locked in a drawer, not to hide it, to protect it. Micah never used the recording for his podcast. He never published the story. He never mentioned Room 41 again in any public way. But he kept the audio, not all of it. Just a clip, 16 seconds. The sound of the door opening, the whisper of a man breathing in as if for the first time, and a single sentence. She was never gone. I just stayed behind. Talia said that was the real ending, not the erasure, not the mystery, but the truth, that some people choose to remain in silence not because they're lost, but because they're remembering something too important to let go of. She said everyone loses someone, but not everyone builds a place to keep them. Room 41 had never been about escape. It had been about holding on, until it was safe to let go. Micah said, maybe that's all anyone really wants, to be remembered by someone who understands why you stayed. Brandon left the university after graduation. He never spoke about the room again. Talia and Micah stayed close, not because of what they found, but because of how they listened to it together. Years later, when someone else moved into Dorman Hall, the basement had already been renovated again. The hallway was shorter now. The maintenance doors were different. No signs of a keypad. No trace of a sealed room, just new paint, clean floors, and fluorescent lights buzzing above. No one mentioned anything strange. Because they never knew, and because silence, when kept carefully enough, outlasts everything. If you've been here since the beginning, thank you. Not just for watching, but for listening. Subscribe if this story left something with you. Like the video if you've ever remembered someone who quietly disappeared. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Because sometimes the door we find isn't to a place, it's to a person. And all they've been waiting for is someone to knock.